All right, welcome everyone to our monthly group check-in call. But this is something that we do every month, and it's something where I get to answer your questions, but also you guys get to ask each other questions. And so, for example, I think it was last month or the month before, um someone was asking about the psionic neural sleeve, and I see Karen is on right now. Karen just got hers and she was talking about her process of trialing it, and I think she has an update for us today. So you can ask each other questions too. Doesn't just have to be questions for me, which I think is really valuable. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start with the questions. Okay, so let's dive in. The first question is excuse me. How do you deal with the mental issues? I have no problems doing or maintaining an exercise regime, but fear of falling and fear of progression can be overwhelming. Let me state that I am not progressing and haven't in 5 years. I have a great neurologist, but I am alone on the farm, and every step makes my brain think I'm having an adventure. My husband's death made me feel very vulnerable, and even 6 months out, I am worried. So this to me is more of a question for you guys. I do want to touch on something here, but if you guys have any thoughts and want to share your experience or guidance that you have, again, you can either type in the chat or unmute yourself. Main question being, how do you deal with the mental issues? As you guys might be typing, I do just want to share that fear of falling, and because what I'm hearing from this is that there's fear of falling and fear of progression, even though you haven't progressed in 5 years. And I'm curious, with you guys being the ones with MS, how you manage that fear of progression. Because I imagine for most people, it might always be there. With MS, there's so many unknowns. But when it comes to the fear of falling, I actually just recorded a podcast episode on this. I think it launched last week, or the week before. Kate, if you could find that, it's the one on proprioception. That might be a helpful resource to share. But one thing that, well, there's two things about fear of falling that are important to look into. And one is it your balance and the mental fear? Or is it truly just the mental fear? Or is it strength and balance and the mental fear? Or is it just the mental fear? Because we want to work on both aspects. If it's the strength and the balance, we want to work on strengthening and balance exercises. But when it comes to the mental side, so much of walking and day-to-day function includes strength and balance and mental work as well. And we've talked about this several times in the missing link, but it requires practicing the specific thing that causes you to be fearful in a more safe environment so you're not as fearful. And doing that over and over again, proving to yourself that you can do it. And it builds up that confidence. A perfect example is one of our missing link members, Mary. She went on vacation one year, and there was cobblestone, and she was terrified of walking on this cobblestone. And there was also sand. They rented an Airbnb, and it was this beautiful beach house, but there were so many surfaces that she was terrified of walking on because she had never practiced it. And she just doesn't have those in her day-to-day life. And fortunately, she was telling me about this fear like 6 months before. And so we developed a plan where she was going to go practice walking on cobblestone and on grass and on uneven surfaces. And that does work your muscles, it works your balance, but it also works your brain. It works the way that your mind perceives these scary situations. And fortunately, through that practice, she was able to go on this vacation, walk on the sand, walk on the cobblestone, and felt much safer and just more mentally at ease. So when it comes to that side of things, I think that's important to mention too, of practicing some of these things so that excuse me, so that mentally you're building up that confidence that you can do it. I see the chat's going off. Let me just see what's going on over here. I have a fear of falling after I fell and broke my hip. Yeah, the fear of falling is real. More times than not, the fear of falling occurs because you fell or because something caused you to become fearful of falling. Carissa says, had this severe fear of progressing, so I got HSCT. Kate shared the proprioception podcast. Thank you, Kate. Christina says, I definitely have fear of falling. I think talking to people about it makes it easier. Bev agrees. Can Do MS is a great organization that has programs that addresses fears and mental issues. Yeah, Can Do MS is a great organization. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this before we move on? This also reminds me of a conversation that we had, oh my gosh, a year ago, maybe 6 months ago. I think it was Cindy, one of our Missing Link members and a mentor, who was sharing that she had a fear of escalators. And we were talking about having her practice getting on an escalator. And you break it down into steps. You don't just immediately go to the thing that makes you super fearful, but you can break things down into steps so that you build up that confidence in steps. Okay, next question. Why do the toes curl on MS affected leg? At which time walking is affected? Is there a remedy or stretch that can stop this from happening? I love this question. So, typically, and of course, everyone is different, but for the most part, the reason that toes curl when we're standing and when we're walking is either due to poor balance and or spasticity when you have more body weight through your legs. So let's talk about the first one first. If you are walking and you have more body weight through your legs and you don't have the best balance, what our minds think is, oh, I'm just going to call someone's name, Pam. Oh, Pam, you don't have good balance. I'll help. And your toes think that they are helping you and they grip for dear life as if they are helping you with standing, with maintaining your balance, even though toe curling doesn't really help with balance, but our minds, our subconscious minds think that it does. If we're holding on to something and it feels unsteady and like it might fall, we grip even harder, even though that might not actually help the situation. So the same thing happens with our feet, where when our balance is off, our toes grip really hard. So one exercise that you can do that will likely reduce toe curling are the balance exercises. And starting off with balance exercises in an easier position. So really wide stance, or if you're doing the stagger stance, really wide, make it as easy as possible so that your toes don't curl. If they're still curling, then that's kind of when we go into the second reason that might be, which is when you have too much body weight through them, your spasticity might kick in, the spasticity on the bottom of your foot. And so we could do exercises like rolling the bottom of your foot with a tennis ball to release some tension. But one really great way to reduce the connection of spasticity and toe curling with body weight being through our legs is to practice putting more body weight through our legs when the toe curling doesn't happen. So the way that I like to do this is seated in a chair. And if it happens on one or both legs, you would do this exercise on one or both sides. And you purposely push your feet down into the floor or position yourself in a way where you have more weight through one or both of your feet. Does the toe curling happen? If so, too much weight. So the goal is to find enough body weight where they're not curling. They might feel like they want to curl, but they don't curl. And then you're training your brain to allow your feet to carry more body weight without your toes curling. Right now, what might be happening is your brain feels body weight and it says, okay, toes curl, even though that's not a normal reaction. So we basically need to unlearn that through practicing with that exercise and then also releasing some of that tension and spasticity with massage. I see Tracy just said toe yoga. So in the toe yoga class, we have one of our MS specific exercise classes in the Missing Link. It's called toe yoga. And there's so many great exercises in there. So you could do some of those to release that tension. while practicing putting weight through your legs. So I hope that helps and answers the toe curling question. I will add there for some people, if it's not related to those two things that I just mentioned, where there's too much body weight, so the spasticity kicks in or your balance is off. If it's just more positional, which it doesn't sound like, because this specific question said it happens when I'm walking. If it was an all the time thing, there are, and I've shared this resource before, there's a website called myfootshop.com. And you can also probably get these things on Amazon, but they do have toe cushions. And sometimes our toes just need a little extra support. And it's literally, I think of it as a pillow for your toes. And you wear it kind of like a toe ring. I haven't actually put these on, so I don't know what it feels like, but it looks comfortable. But you wear it like a toe ring, but on the underside, it's like a little pillow for your toes. So they get to relax on there. So for some people, something like that might be helpful. Usually that's not the issue, which is why it was the afterthought that I had, but wanted to mention it in case someone finds it helpful. One of the recent challenges in our Facebook accountability group was focused attention. In a comment, you wrote, "We can have focused attention during rest breaks. Can you explain what you mean by this?" Yes. So there's lots of different ways to promote neuroplasticity. And one way is through focused attention. And so there's two different ways that you can implement this. One way is during an exercise. Another way is between exercises, or you can think of it as during your rest break. And the reason I mentioned this in the comment, if I'm remembering correctly, was because someone said potentially that maybe they didn't do as well with the exercise when they had focused attention, or it just reminded them of how poorly they were doing when they had focused attention, which is why I mentioned this alternative. So, option one is to have focused attention during the exercise. So let's just say you're doing the marching exercise. Your attention is focused on, where am I feeling it? Can I feel this in my hip flexors? How high am I lifting it up off the ground, if at all? And you're really focused on the exercise. You're not mentally making your grocery list or your Christmas list or things that you need to do that day. You're thinking about that individual exercise. However, another way that you can do this is by implementing focused attention during your rest break. So you do your marching exercise while thinking about what you need to buy for Christmas and what's on your to-do list. You can multitask like that. But during your rest break, you do something that requires full attention. Maybe it's a crossword puzzle. Maybe it's writing your name with your non-dominant hand. Um, Maybe it's, now I'm losing ideas, something that requires attention for you. Everyone's going to be different on here, but you could do something like that during the rest break. So you do a round of marches on your right leg and your left leg, and then you write your name 5 times with your non-dominant hand. Then you go back to your marches, or you move on to the next exercise. So that's how you would implement it between exercises during rest breaks. And that goes for any of the ways to increase neuroplasticity. One of the other ones is to add a challenge and urgency. One of my favorite ways is through the Bop It. You could do the Bop It, which is just a kid's toy, but it really, if a bunch of us have it now because I posted about it and a lot of you guys got it. It creates urgency. There's this music that's playing. It's fun, but it creates this sense of, I got to press the right button and I got to do the right thing. You could do that while you're doing an exercise. That might be really challenging. Or you could do it during your rest break. So you do your marches, then you play your Bop It while you're resting. And then you do your leg kicks and you play your Bop It. So that's what I mean when I say you can implement these things during a rest break. I've noticed that I'm swinging my left leg a lot less lately. Thanks. Yay, that's awesome. But when I struggle to walk, another lovely habit has taken hold: hip hiking. Although I have been doing leg kicks every day, isometric and classic, and marching every day, flamingo, sitting, standing, for 3 months. What could help me break this habit? When could I expect an improvement? So, the first thing that I want to mention about this question is that, and there's no way for me to know this, the person who asked this might know this, but my question would be, has the hip hiking always been there, or is it truly a new habit? So often, as one thing improves, we start to notice other things. And this is a perfect example. I have a podcast episode. I worked one-on-one with a missing link member. Her name was Deb, and I asked her to come on my podcast as like a testimonial type of thing because she experienced this exact thing where we were working on something and it improved, but then she noticed this. And if you're not in the right mindset, it can feel like, well, what the heck? Now I have this to deal with. But in reality, it's a really good thing because more often than not, this other thing, in this case, now this hip hiking, it was there the whole time. It just wasn't as big of an issue as the knee bending, right? Is that what it was? Let me get back to the question here. Um, the swinging was a bigger issue. So it just wasn't as big of an issue as the swinging, so you didn't notice it. Maybe you didn't notice it at all, or you noticed it a little bit, but it wasn't really affecting you. But now that your leg is swinging less, now you're noticing it more, which is great. So now we can focus on that. So it's actually a good thing when you start to notice more symptoms like that as other symptoms are improving. And I actually talked, this was our exact topic earlier today in the Facebook live chat that I did. But basically, what I was sharing is hip hiking. Let me show you if someone doesn't know. So if you watch this leg, hip hiking, and I'm going to really exaggerate. So these are my hips right here. So normal walking, your hips don't really go up and down a whole lot. They just kind of stay even. But when you have hip hiking, this happens. And I'm really exaggerating, but you hike your hip and then it comes down, hike. And so the more you can bend your knee, the less that will happen. Now, in this specific case, get back up here to you guys. Let me go back to the question. So in this specific case, the person is saying, um, although I've been doing leg kicks every day. So leg kicks are the exercise where you're straightening your knee. So you're focusing on improving your quad strength and then bending your knee. So the bending of the knee is going to be the most helpful because we want to improve knee bending to reduce hip hiking. And they've been doing marching every day. Marching won't necessarily help with hip hiking because the issue with hip hiking, usually the reason that happens is due to your knee not bending enough. So the leg kicks would be a great exercise to continue. And then also, even the standing hamstring curls would be great. And maybe even taking it the next step and implementing. So, an exercise like the single leg, or no, that's not what I meant to say, the single step or the exaggerated walking. The standing hamstring curls or standing leg kicks would be a great option too, because it's a more functional position in standing. So working the bending of your knee in those functional positions is probably going to be one of the best things that you can do. So it sounds like you're off to a great start. The other part of the question was doing those exercises for 3 months. What could help break this habit? So what would break the habit is improved strength and bending your knees. So prioritizing all of those knee bending exercises. And then also implementing, because if you don't implement, and what I mean by that is you could do all the exercises in the world sitting in your chair, but if you never practice those same exercises when standing or when walking, when you have MS, your brain doesn't understand, oh, Debbie wants me to do this when I'm walking too. And you could have full strength standing, but then you go to walk and you're like, what the heck? It's not working. You're not implementing it. And so practicing those standing leg kicks, the standing hamstring curls, the single step exercise, the exaggerated walking can be a way for you to kind of break that habit and allow yourself to overcome that hip hiking. In terms of how long will it take, I wish I could. I wish I could give an answer. If you guys have had experience, feel free to share that in the comments or in the chat box. I will say knee bending, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but for the majority of the people that I work with, one-on-one clients, missing link members, knee bending is the hardest and takes the longest. So that might mean that it takes 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half. It's gonna be different for everyone. The most important thing is that you just stay consistent with it, even if you're not seeing results right now. So it sounds like this person is, but those are some tips that I have for that. Yeah, it's one of those ones that across the board, I would say like 95% of the people that I work with, knee bending is the hardest for them. Okay. Could you show us how, or sorry, could you show us the isometric ankle dorsiflexion? So I don't think I've ever given isometric ankle dorsiflexion because it's kind of tricky to do. So I don't think I've ever demonstrated it, but I can demonstrate it for the person who's interested. So before I do that, I should explain isometric exercises means that you are exercising in a way where you're using the muscle, but the muscle doesn't move. My favorite example of this is if I was to do a bicep curl, even without a weight or anything. So, okay, down here. So I've got my hand here. I could do a bicep curl like this. This is a concentric contraction because my bicep that I'm working is shortening and then lengthening and then shortening and then lengthening. The way to work my bicep muscle with the same exercise, but isometrically, so that this doesn't shorten and lengthen, is to add resistance. So I would start with my elbow bent. I could push down. So I'm going to bend my elbow, but this hand is not going to let it move. So you guys won't see a whole lot, but it basically would look like this. So I can really feel my bicep working right now, but it's not moving. It's not bending. It's not shortening. It's not lengthening. So this is an isometric version of a bicep exercise. So for ankle dorsiflexion, it's with your ankle lifting up and down. If you wanted to do it isometrically, what I think the best, most functional way would be to get near a surface that you can slide your foot under like this, like my chair fortunately had some space under it and I could lift up. So you're not going to see much because the chair is holding it down, but I'm dorsiflexing right now. And then I'm relaxing. Dorsiflex, relax. So that would probably be the most functional. I suppose you could always try it where you're pushing like this, but then you might be getting some angling, which is not ideal. So that's probably what I would suggest if you're looking for an isometric version. But thanks everyone for submitting all of your questions. Thanks for staying this whole time. Have a good rest of your night. Thanks for tuning in.